Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors webinar series on how to lead a team in China. You have joined us for our last and final session of this webinar series pertaining to the subject of how to lead a team in China. Do you have a high turnover of employees in China? Are you having problems in implementing your company's philosophy and culture? Are you adapting to the Chinese culture? Are you having difficulties in finding the right team? Woodburn Accountants and Advisors is offering this series of complimentary webinars on recruitment and how to manage and lead a team in order to be able to provide companies with information and tools to enrich their business skills in the Chinese market. Today, I'm very happy to have Manfred Steinkellner from Steinkellner China Search, who will be joining me in a bit of a debate, and it'll be sort of a thought leadership type of webinar, whereby we will be sharing our own experiences in how our clients have managed themselves in China, but also how we have been managing our own teams in China. But before we begin today's session, I just want to do the typical administration aspect. The use of a VPN may be required by people that are based in mainland China or even in the Middle East due to blockages against the firewalls. I'm also currently on a VPN, and as a consequence with webinars, there are sometimes technical issues that do arise. Please don't exit the webinar. It usually does take about 30 seconds to 1 minute to rejoin and have the audio back to normal. Once you've launched into the webinar, you would have been prompted to choose your audio. The cheapest option for you is to choose your mic and speakers that are either on your tablet, computer, or on your mobile. If you are having difficulties with the sound system, you may want to switch from your mic and speakers to a landline. If you click on the telephone option, you will then get a dial-in number, an access code, and an audio pin, and you will then join in via the landline. Now, the whole point of today's session is really that Manfred and I share our stories, our opinions, our experiences in terms of how to find the right people in the Chinese market. If you do have any questions that pop up throughout our explanations or debate today, please add them into the questions section of the control panel, and we will either lead off on some of these questions that come in, or either Manfred or myself will then reach out to you at a later stage. Now, if we could just test the system, if you would be so kind as to click on the hand button in your control panel, that will give me the signal that you're listening in. Thank you so much. And if you could re-click it, that will help me to know that it's all cleared up. As is typical, we always have new faces every day in our webinars. So just for those of you that are not familiar to Woodburn or to myself, just a very brief and quick introduction before we kick off today's session. Woodburn Accountants and Advisors is specialized in inbound investment to China and Hong Kong. Very simply, we establish, manage, and administer companies in both jurisdictions to meet our clients' specific requirements and needs. Everything from market entry, advisory and implementation, as well as then expansion, all the way to cross-border investment, tax optimization, corporate restructuring, and the typical ongoing administration needs such as accounting, tax, and payroll services. Our clients are all international companies. We don't focus on specific jurisdictions, and all these clients are focused on inbound Asia investment. Our clients are doing a variety of things. They're in a variety of sectors and industries, and they might either produce in China, export to China, meaning doing e-commerce sales and whatnot, as well as export from China to their home countries, and then offer a variety of services locally within the Chinese market. And they basically range from, startup organizations, multinationals, publicly listed companies as well. Just a minor disclaimer, this is the first time that Woodburn has conducted such a webinar whereby we're not focusing on a presentation style format. There will be slides which will kind of lead us to what we want to discuss today, but we're really going to be focusing on our experiences our opinions. If you do have specific questions that are related to your industry, your sector, or to your own company and yourself, again, please add them into the questions section and either Manfred or myself will then reach out to you. My name is Christina Kohler-Kalucha. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors, and I will be one party to today's discussion. I've been in this industry and sector of corporate services since 2003. I've only ever been in the Chinese market in my working life. So I've got almost 16 years, end of August will be 16 years of experience in China. Some things that I want to just highlight about what I've learned in terms of how to lead a team in China, and this is just, you know, a very superficial thing that I kind of want to start off in today's discussion, is the first is understanding that there is a support system in China. So if you don't know something, for example, an aspect to the labor law or an aspect to the culture, there is a variety of providers on the market that you can reach out to, and I myself reach out to. So whether that be lawyers, other forms of advisors, recruitment consultants, knowing that there is a support system on the ground can aid you tremendously to increase your knowledge level and know how to deal with employees if you're in a tight situation. The other thing that I've learned is really to be able to adapt myself to the Chinese culture, which is probably something strange. If some of you know my background, I'm born and raised in Hong Kong. I feel more Asian than I do actually Western. Almost my entire life has been spent on the ground in either Hong Kong or in Shanghai. And as a consequence, I never really thought when I had moved to Shanghai in 2003 that I would get a culture shock. But oh boy, did I. And as the time progressed, I realized that there was a lot of things that I had to adapt myself in order to be able to communicate better with my employees as well as with suppliers, customers, and whatnot. And I had to understand more about the cultural ways of doing business, what I was allowed, not allowed to say, etc., and what I should do, right, in order to promote and retain employees. There was a lot that I learned, and trust me, initially when I was in China, we just generally had huge turnover, and for us that was the norm because every single company had huge turnover. After about 6-7 years of being on the market, I was able to lower our ratio down to less than 5% turnover rate, which even when I mention that statistic, a lot of people are in shock. There's a lot of things that I implemented, but you know, I don't want to lead off on that now. I want to get into the discussion with Manfred. So I'm going to allow Manfred to just quickly introduce himself as well as his firm, and then we can kick off today's session. Manfred?
Hello, Christina, the guests and audience. Is a pleasure to be here today. As I said before, I'm really looking forward to this particular webinar that we've been doing together. So just a few words about myself as well as about the things that we're doing. Similar to Christina, I've been in the game since 2003. It's been a very interesting, a very exciting journey so far. I haven't been kind of spending most of my life in Asia or in China in particular. For me, it's kind of different. I come from Europe and bring those European roots with quite a bit of a passion for China, particular Chinese food, and what's going on over there. So this is kind of where I'm coming from, and with that background, what I love to do is essentially to do the bridge building. All of you who are out there, or your friends or your business partners who've done this already, you know, there needs to be some bridge between your entity in China, your team in China, and headquarters. And this is what I find fascinating, and this is also where I think a lot of things go wrong. Obviously, that has a lot to do with the people who are involved, but also, you know, talking about strategies and talking about communication channels, communication structure, and so on and so forth. So I take all that interest and that passion and essentially apply that to find the right people for our clients. be that the sales general manager, plant manager, or a head of marketing or whatnot. And I think with that, Christina, we can move on to the next slide. So what my company does is we identify and attract the right leaders for mainly Western organizations in China quite fast, because there never really is a time to do it and to get it done. We're focusing on sales and production in all sorts of different environments, be that small, medium-sized enterprises, or be that large multinational organizations, be that a 100% daughter setup as in a WOFE, or be that a joint venture. And obviously, one of our key focus is always, to make our clients successful in China. So apart from setting and finding the right leaders, we've also started to set up a team for attracting the operational talents that you actually need in order to get going. So operational sales people, even down to personal assistants, whatever it is to take to be successful. But Christina, I think enough about that, right?
All right.
Shall we get going into our discussion?
Sure.
Yeah. So maybe just a few pictures to start off with. Many of us, also those of us, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's even like this for you, Christina, sometimes you try to understand something in China, now talking about mainland China, and it just seems to be, cloudy, foggy. You can't really get to the ground of it. I felt like that most of the time when I had my first couple of years in China with the Chinese traffic. I was always wondering, why is there not many more accidents? And so with the next slide, Christina, what we'll try to do here, kind of with how do I say it, with a pure intention, is to get to the ground of things, to understand a little bit what Christina is thinking about this, or what she's experienced, and the same way that I did. And this is kind of, as she pointed out before, we're doing this particular format the first time today, so please bear with us. But I've also seen that there's quite a few of the regular visitors coming in and listening in, so we're very happy and pleased to have you here.
So just to highlight a little bit on what Manfred just mentioned in terms of having a foggy point of view or a foggy view on China, I think the issue is that it truly stems on the fact that laws and regulations in China are not black and white. So
absolutely.
I think from my perspective, I'll just give a case study that I'm working on right now. I'm setting up a company for a client in China, and we're at the stage of bank account opening. Met the bank numerous times. They actually already have a staff member who has a relationship already with this specific bank officer. And even as we are progressing, the information that we were initially provided for the account opening currently now completely different. So this alone, even within organizations and big organizations where you think that it's impossible for there not to be a solid structure or a solid routine, it doesn't work like that. Things are consistently changing. Things are constantly being updated. And the issue in China is you have to be on the ball to get yourselves updated as quickly as possible as well. And this can happen in whatever aspect, whether it's related to human resource, employees, banks, anything.
And you were saying that before, Christina. That essentially you kind of need to adapt. And I find that now I'm based in Austria, and especially kind of for Central Europe, talking about Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and probably also the UK. I think we're used quite to something different, right? Isn't it?
Absolutely. In Europe, things are black and white. You ask a bank in Germany. You ask a bank in Germany how you open an account, and you're for sure you're gonna, the day you open it, it's gonna be the same process.
You'll not have 23 different options to do it, no?
Exactly. I think though, something that I constantly forget because I've been for so long there is the fact that I'm used to this. So for me, I'm actually prepared for things to not go the way from the first meeting. But for Western people, this is something that is completely outrageous. And
It's
it takes a
outrageous, and
lot
you
of,
know, it's also really frustrating, or it can
it
be really
is,
frustrating
yeah,
because I mean, you know, if you think about kind of settings where you're thinking about entering the market and kind of you don't have a team there and you're doing kind of these back and forth trips and maybe you only go once in 3 months or something like this, and then you try to kind of put a couple of meetings in 1 week. And then you find out in that 1 week that there's actually 1 or 2 critical documents missing for finally opening that bank account. It's very frustrating.
it is, it is, it is. So I think the biggest thing is, Manfred's listed out a bunch of questions here that usually a lot of people ask themselves, but I think the first question is really the critical one. Where to start, right?
Mm.
You know you want to go into China, and I can tell you in about 80% of the cases of companies that I meet, their first objective is to test the market.
Mm. Mm.
They want to see that actually there's potential there, whether that's for selling in the market, whether that's, you know, sourcing. And generally the consensus is we want to have someone on the ground we can rely on, but we don't want to make the investment yet in setting up a company there.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Manfred, is that your general outlook when you're meeting with companies as well?
Yes and no. Yes, I think generally that perspective for those who are not there, I think quite a lot of them are thinking this way. I say no because a lot of those that I meet, they're actually already there. We're doing, I guess we're doing more business with companies who are already established in China and already on the ground, simply also because they have a higher need. Because they'll recruit quite a couple of roles over a year. But yeah, I think everybody wants to test it and needs to be starting somewhere. And I think, you know, kind of going in a low cost, very flexible kind of way is great because it also makes you much faster. Because I think one of the things in starting in China really is about speed. I mean, yes, you can spend 3, 5, 6 years drafting business plans and revising them and changing them and redrawing them again. But I think really what you need is kind of to be in there and to get real feedback. And especially if you are maybe not a very large organization, you need a kind of, you know, if we're talking about China as a sales market, you need something like a structured way to actually look at that feedback. Just having one person and going to a lot of companies and you know, trying to pitch your let's say B2B product or your B2B services, you know, that might be tricky for headquarters to then figure out what's actually going on. But having a structured way of looking at that data and then saying, well, yes, there is actually potential and we need to move ahead. I think speed is one of the keys, talking about where to start and how to start.
So from your perspective, for companies that are in this situation where they're not yet in the market and they'd like to have some, you know, they've either done their market research study or they're eliminating the study aspect in order to have someone on the ground who's going to physically do it themselves. From your perspective, Westerner or Chinese as the first?
So what are we talking about? We're talking about, let's say, an organization with 100-ish, 200-ish people, and they are trying to go into China and they've got nothing there, essentially.
No, exactly. I mean, it could even be smaller organizations with just 50 people, right? Depending on the sector and whether they're a service-oriented company versus necessarily a product-oriented. But generally speaking, what are companies inclined to do?
I see 2 different ways, and each one of them has got a couple of positives and a couple of negatives to it. One way is if you go into it and set something up, then obviously sending somebody whom you know, whom you can trust, is very, very important and critical over a distance of, let's say, 8,000 kilometers. You want to have somebody there whom you can trust and whom you can rely on. in that regards, you know, finding somebody who's been with you or your organization for a long time, whom you know well, that obviously is going to be helping you a lot. However, on the other hand side, if we are talking about let's say a B2B business case, and you are trying to sell something to either European companies in China or Chinese companies, essentially it will boil down to guanxi, to having a certain network of contacts. Because I've never seen any kind of cold calling technique in China being particularly successful. And with that, that also naturally means that you should be really looking for Chinese people with that network into your target industries. And you know, not even network in target industries, it goes closer. It really says, like, are we targeting automotive on what? On the serial production level, on selling machines to them, or R&D centers? You need somebody who is coming with those particular contacts into those particular areas of your target segment. And I think there is obviously, most of the time is going to be much easier to achieve that with Chinese people, or put differently, the feedback that you'll receive will be much faster. And I would also assume that in most cases is also in terms of investment and what you get from it, is going to be a better ratio in employing Chinese people than trying to negotiate with some of your long-term employees to take his family and move over to China.
I mean, I'll just give my 2 cents on this in terms of what I've seen with my own clients. So Woodburn, we offer an incubation service. We found this service extremely useful for companies that are not looking to make the investment and commitment yet in terms of setting up a company, but want someone on the ground. So as part of this service, what we do is we help to employ this individual through our own entity and make sure they're legally employed, paying the salaries and social insurances and tax and whatnot. Now, in the general view of all the clients that I've had over the years, in the last 10 years, I can openly say that not a single client has brought over a Westerner. They've all hired local. And the main reason behind that is cost, because the cost of sending over a Westerner in terms of, you know, hardship allowance, which I always laugh at, because I find that going to a big city in China is actually so much more fun and less hardship than Europe.
€25,000 for staying in Suzhou, right?
Exactly. But, you know, in any case, they offer these types of hardship allowances, and very naturally, Western schools are expensive, and especially if they bring their families over, they'll want to stay in nice homes, so they'll go to very much the luxury apartments and villas when you don't have to. So the whole cost in general is exorbitant. But obviously, if you go then the local route, where I've had some clients where they've been able to find Chinese individuals who speak as a second language their own mother tongue. So one case was actually a Spanish company who had found a fantastic sales guy who's mainland Chinese, but spoke Spanish as a second language. Now, these are rare gems, but you are able to find individuals like that, and it lowered the cost tremendously. In terms of every...
I think, sorry if I may just shortly add on this one, Christina. I wouldn't even, at least for the German-speaking market, and definitely for the English-speaking market, I wouldn't even think it's rare gems. You know, by now there's been so many Chinese people who've either been educated in Europe and then returned home, or who managed to learn very good German or English or Spanish in China. So yes, they're a bit trickier to find, obviously. But in terms of absolute numbers, there's quite a few of those, you know, bi and trilingual talents out there, I think.
It is getting there. But then, you know, you've got also the next category of clients that I've had where they've just hired local employees. And I think the critical point with these local employees in terms of what they offered to them was first a training period in their head office, where, you know, they, first of all, were able to network with team members so that they knew who they were actually in contact with when they were back in China. They had this visual of what the person looked like, how they behaved. And then obviously they learned the philosophy and processes of how the company works. A lot of people underestimate this whole doing a training in the home office aspect, which from my side, I see it as a critical component for the clients that have been quite successful.
You,
In the market.
I think we've just recently kind of closed one case where we've kind of recruited a Chinese plant manager for a rather large organization, and there's been two kind of two different philosophies in there among the key stakeholders. Some people, they kind of were rather focused on trying to kind of find the perfect candidate, and then one of the business unit heads that I was working with, he said, look, Mr. Steinkeller, you know, for me it's much more about the onboarding. And this is exactly what you're saying. You know, when you find those people, you really need to make sure that you pay attention to the onboarding, because they're bridgeheads. They're going to be the first kind of person of your team in China, and that is always hard to do. There's kind of hardly a support there. There is, you know, it's hard to go through the not so good days. And thinking about a really good onboarding, I think is crucial if you want to move ahead, because otherwise I think what happens is that these people then actually leave if they simply feel that they have no support.
Right. Well, I think let's lead it on to then another question. Otherwise, we can stick on each topic for hours. But if we lead on to another question, Manfred, from your experience, for companies that are already established in China, for those that are hiring Westerners, what do you see as being the bullet point profiles that they have? Why would someone hire a Westerner if budget was not an issue?
I think there's a couple of different things. What I see and what I observe a lot is that I've seen it with, I don't know, well-known organizations like KUKA, for example, the robot producer from Germany, where essentially, you know, people said after they had introduced two Chinese general managers, it kind of became a black hole. Communication did not flow towards the headquarters. And I think this is something that organizations face a lot, is a communication issue. You really want your headquarters and your China organization to be in sync. So I think communication can be one of those key reasons that you actually want to go for a Westerner. If we are talking production environments, then quality and a certain quality philosophy and understanding of quality might be another one. And kind of from a third perspective, what I see quite a lot with family-owned entities is that it's simply a matter of policy, not necessarily for life, but at least for, I don't know, the first 3 years, the first 5 years, the first 10 years. They want to have a European top management in their entity in China. So I think it's also a bit, you know, a function of how long have you actually been on the Chinese market? Have you been there for 30 years? Or did you just come in 2 years ago? Or are you going to come in 2020? So it's those three things.
Right. Well, let's now lead on to the next step, which is how do we find people? And on this slide, this is obviously one of the first steps, which is kind of doing it on your own and using local resources. So things like WeChat, LinkedIn, Zhaopin, there's China HR, there's 51job.com. People also use fairs as a tool. Manfred, what is your general opinion about doing things online, going to fairs, or even just asking people if they know someone?
You know, for me, it always depends pretty much on the situation you're in, the resources that you have. I think objectively, if you really look at data, is just that the digital penetration, if I may call it that way, in Asia or in China is just much higher than it actually is in Europe, also leading to good response rates on many of the digital channels. So I think it's good, but you know, at the end of the day, we're people. And if you already have a team in China, and if you want to add new team members, then obviously you want that these people work together well. And if you, I don't know, I've seen companies who have a bonus system where if one of the existing employees brings on new talent that really fits in very well, then they get a bonus. I think that's, you know, a great system in a very competitive market.
I've seen that as well.
Yeah.
It's a great system. You just have to watch out that they don't hire their family.
Yeah,
You have to do a little bit of due diligence to make sure.
yeah. No, I mean, the family issue is always a topic, especially in many of the kind of larger teams, but also of the smaller teams that have come in. You know, it doesn't take you long to figure out this is going to be the uncle. And you also just need to look kind of at the key roles in certain organizations where the money is controlled to kind of see if they brought in family or not. But yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you.
I mean, from my perspective, I use LinkedIn and 51job.com a lot in terms of my own research for hiring myself. I think one thing that people should not underestimate is the time resource involved doing it on your own, and especially if you're not sure about the resumes you're receiving or the background of the people you're receiving. I've been doing this for 16 years, so when I get resumes from accountants, I can kind of get an inkling what is true, what is not true, and what their basic experience is. Mm-hmm. If you're new to the market and you're doing all this process by yourself, one thing is, you know, will you get a response from people? You can send emails to 100 people that have posted for a job, and you might only get 5 responses back. And they might not be the quality you're expecting. A lot of Chinese are not on LinkedIn, so that's something you have to be aware of. You'll find that most senior people are on LinkedIn, but a lot still are not. It's not a channel that's always used. So, you know, you just have to be privy to the fact that it is extremely time consuming going the digital route, or even, you know, asking people around and waiting for feedback. If the first component that Manfred mentioned earlier on was time. If you're in a rush to get in the market and the first step is for you to find someone good and reliable and solid, this will be the option for you if you're in that type of rush time frame. So just keep that in mind. So Manfred, what other supports are there for people if they don't go the digital route?
If they don't go the digital route, you mean
I mean,
support?
If they don't,
You mean support as in external companies to help them,
yes,
or support?
Yeah, exactly.
I know there's many on there. Just put in Headhunter China or Recruitment China or whatever on your Google, and then you'll see kind of a lot of the options available. So I think there's a lot out there. What I'd really see, or what I'd really say is, you know, I think they need to understand you, that whomever you are hiring to do that job for you, there should be 2 things. On one hand side, no, maybe 3. One hand side, they should be understanding China. I personally do not see these kind of setups working where you have rather junior type consultants here in Europe connected with rather junior type consultants in Asia. And so here in Europe, they don't understand what the client's really looking for. And then they try to purvey that to their colleagues in Asia without maybe even knowing them or without knowing Asia. So, you know, these kind of setups, I find them too fragile. I find them tricky. And this is what I see happening kind of a lot in the larger agencies. So I think, you know, you should be talking to the people who understand what's going on over there and whom you can also trust. And if you say, let's say you suggest a time frame that's simply not going to work, I would think that is, you know, expected then also to kind of, you know, hear that in a way from the people who are trying to help you, because sooner or later you'll need to accept reality. That's one thing. Second thing is, what kind of role are you hiring for? I wouldn't feel comfortable if I'm trying to get a business development person or a salesperson for the Chinese market, and then I'm talking to a kind of recruiting consultant who's been doing quality control jobs for all his life. So it's a bit what Christina said before in terms of the accountants. You know, the people who help you they should kind of be familiar and understand the roles that you're talking about. Because again, there's so many nuances and so many things that they should be picked up in a clean and good process. And then the third thing is obviously, you know, they should be able to understand your environment. And with environment, I mean that a 30 people organization who is kind of owner funded and owner led acts differently as a 200 people organization that's scaling quickly because of venture capital injected, or a 20,000 people organization who's been on the market for 100 years. It's just different environments, and I think the people you want to work with and who should be helping you, it'd be very helpful for you if they understand these environments.
Yeah, I just want to add on to actually what Manfred has said. I see a lot of companies go into China, and I say this from the point of view of they've either already been there for a certain period of time or they're new to the market, where they will have an idea and they're pretty adamant that this idea is what they're looking for in terms of a candidate. And then nobody tells them the truth, that actually what they're looking for is not existing, or you need to be able to work with a consultant who is also truthful to you. You know, you get a lot of people who assume that they can find someone like they would find someone in Europe in terms of profile, background, experience, knowledge level, etc. And sometimes that just doesn't exist in China. You need, and in addition to that, what I've also noticed is that you also get a lot of clients who, after having interviewed the first couple of candidates, will realize they need someone completely different, right? and their mind changes immediately. So you definitely need to work with a consultant who is patient with you, but also explains what's the reality of the market in terms of being able to find these profiles or these types of candidates. Go ahead, Manfred.
Sorry, if I may add, I think here the key word again really is relationship. You want to be working with people whom you can trust. And I think on many levels, this is also what you said in the beginning in different words, is, you know, if you go into China, you'll need to adapt. You'll need to adapt in many things, and you'll need also to learn and bring that knowledge back home. Yeah. You know, it's all right to make a mistake once, but if you keep on repeating that same mistake, that is then not going to be working out for you. And so I think here as well, if you talk about who are the right people to support you, this needs to be a kind of a back and forth discussion, because at the end of the day, if you're wasting a lot of time. If you keep looking for people that you don't find, you waste easily 6 months, and you probably also waste resources. And this is the critical thing. Again, I think if you really should be going into China, and if your market analysis shows that this could be a potential strategic market, then one of the key topics is speed.
Yeah. And I just want to add a second point here, because I had highlighted it in yesterday's presentation. You should also be doing, together with your consultant, a salary analysis, because I will also see a lot of clients who want to do it by themselves. They've got a budget in mind, and either they cannot find the right people because they've budgeted too low, or, and this is what frustrates me, is that they budget so high that they get people who are actually they get people who are actually underqualified, meaning they don't have the right skill set, but you're paying them so much money, and it totally causes a disbalance in the market. Because you're not getting yourself aware about what are actually current salary rates, trends, also what are the right titles that are being used in the market for certain roles. I get very frustrated because especially when I hired my own organization.
This is something where I think you're really great at, Christina, because with your experience as well as your kind of strategic mindset, you know, also that service that you essentially offer your clients to say, look, we're not just going to be kind of doing the bookkeeping, but we'll do kind of the budgets up front, and then we'll do the reviews, and then we give you feedback and all those things, so that you see why you're kind of going in the wrong direction, or where you actually took the wrong turn. I think that is something of a service that if I was kind of a smaller organization, a European trying to get into, I definitely want to look into that one, because it's just, you know, so helpful. If I'm here, if I've been living in Austria or in the UK or in Italy for the last 40 years, and I've got no clue about Shanghai, it's going to be nigh to impossible, or it's taken me way too long to actually figure out how much is that salesperson going to be earning in Shanghai. It will just take too long. I think this is also where Christina made a great point before, is, you know, build your own ecosystem. Everybody thinks differently. Everybody's got a different philosophy. You can build your ecosystem only with business partners, or build it with consultants and lawyers and so on and so forth. But build it, and then you know, ask that ecosystem if that makes sense. And yes, a couple of times you will look rather foolish when you're asking certain questions. But again, this is the way most of us actually do learn. And I think it's super
there
critical.
is no dumb question in China. There's no dumb question in China.
No, and I think it's, yeah.
Well, let's move on. So we've talked a little bit about, you know, doing the recruitment aspect in terms of finding the right people, doing it on your own, or getting the support. Just as a conclusion from my perspective, and Manfred, maybe you can add on then your perspective. If it was me, I would use a consultant, an HR consultant, to first of all help you build up the knowledge level of, you know, what you need to know in terms of profiles, what you need to know in terms of salary levels, etc., that you have a bit of a solid ground when you go in the market. If you're there 10, 15, 20 years, by all means, you'll know the ways of finding the right people. You'll already have your ecosystem or network, and you can then do it by yourself and use the various digital channels. But at least to start off, you know, you use someone who can guide you in that process. Manfred, anything to add?
I'm with you. The only thing I'd probably add is, you know, after a while, you know your organization, and if you come across a stone that's too big to handle, then you go and ask for externals. And also, obviously, you know, even if you have 200 people in China, you can't ask your head of HR in China to recruit her new boss, her new general manager. So there will always be, you know, certain cases when you need to be doing an external, otherwise you'll just bring in way too much noise into your organization in China.
Right. So let's move on to how to choose a candidate. So I mean, we've gone through the process. You know, basically, you've gone through a different, you know, a channel to find people. You're getting a bunch of different resumes, and now you've got a filter. So Manfred, what would be your advice in terms of the whole filtering process, interview process? What would be your recommendations?
Are we, I mean, now that we're using this slide, Christina, are we at the point where we kind of select between the last two candidates, or are we talking generally about how to filter and select?
I think just generally how you filter, select, and then come down to the last couple of candidates.
I mean, so I think, you know, there's the obvious part. So you will have some checklists, you will have some requirements. For me, I try to approach this from a very simple perspective, always. And that simple perspective is, what does this person need to be doing in the next 3 years? You know, there's a crucial difference between having somebody on board and actually getting the job done that needs to be done. So I'd always rather think about the second thing. I don't want just to fill the role. If the goal is to grow the organization for, let's say, double the sales volume in the next 5 years, or in the next 3 years, or in the next 7 years, depending on how aggressive you are, then obviously we need to be looking for that kind of person who can make that happen. And I think this should always kind of be the main point, and from that you can derive a lot of things. What I'd rather, where I'd like to kind of play that question back, Christina, is, you know, for the critical people in your own organization or in your own past, what was kind of, you know, the things that were important to you, in terms of, you know, not the objective things, but more as we are as human beings.
Well, I think then I'll move on to the next slide because this will guide me through it. Um, I truly have learned over the years that, you know, developing a personal relationship with the employees has also helped me to retain employees. I think if you like each other also on a personal level, it's going to relate into your professional life. And I don't mean that by saying you have to invite your staff to your house, but it's more just have a lunch together once in a while and ask the questions like, how's your family? Are you married? Are you going to get married? Do you have children? How old are they? Where do they go to school? Do they do activities? How are your parents? You know, just asking certain personal questions has always made my team feel like they're valued by me, the boss. And I will say this to anybody in the hierarchy, and I will ask these questions to anybody in the hierarchy. And I will have these lunches every so often with anybody in the hierarchy. And it always gives the opportunity for people to also ask me the same questions. And you know, when you have these lunches, you always get then into business questions like, do you like the company? Do you like what you're doing? It helps and obviously when you go through the interview process, there is always that initial chemistry, right? That nobody can actually tell you whether there's that chemistry or not. But when I'm interviewing someone, I'll know if there's chemistry or not. It's a gut feeling. Like, I really like this person. I can have a conversation. I can communicate. Trust me, I've had some candidates come into an interview where it didn't last more than 10 minutes because they just couldn't loosen up and relax and talk. And it wasn't a language problem. It was the issue that they just couldn't relax. They were too stressed, and there was no way I was going to understand if there would be chemistry or not.
And I think this chemistry part and this gut feeling is, you know, that is one of the most crucial things, and also one of the most difficult ones, because you can't objectivize it. You know, you can't kind of give it a 0 to any. It's you know, right. is that feeling, but it's a very important feeling. And one other thing you touched at, which I'd like to kind of highlight from two angles. In China, definitely definitely stark contrast to, let's say, Germany. Yes, you will ask about family. Yes, you will talk about these matters, and especially if you're leading a team, you will care about a person's family life, because if you don't, you give that person the impression that you don't care, and hence you lose him. So only from that perspective, from retaining my talent, my team perspective, you will need to do that as a leader, as a leadership in a leadership position. And from the second perspective, you know, I had 1 or 2 scars on my recruitment cases where we had recruited for our clients very capable leaders, who then actually after 6 months, 9 months, 12 months left. And then I was trying to figure out, why did that happen? And one of the things that I did not pay attention to in my early years was simply family. You know, if people are down, if people don't have a good job, or if people don't have a job at all, they will take whatever comes along, even if that's very far away from family. However, obviously, also in China, many of the people do want to be close to family. So then a little bit later on, when something comes by that is better suited to them, closer maybe to Beijing where they live, or closer to Nanjing where they live, or if they live somewhere in Xinjiang, it doesn't matter. Just, you know, all of us want to be with family. So do consider that, and do not, you know, let potential employees tell you that they don't care, that their family is actually up in Shenyang and they have to work down in Guangzhou. It does matter. It does matter a lot.
I think because we've got 10 minutes left, I don't want to dash through things, but I just want to highlight one aspect regarding cultural fit, because I want to highlight competence and salary on the next 2 slides. But just in terms of cultural fit, I'm going to give a story about what I did when I first started. I arrived, I was 23 years old, and there was absolutely no way at that time that I could hire a man. No man because of the Chinese culture, was going to listen to me because of my youth and the fact that I was a female. So for the first almost 10 years of my career, I only hired women, which also didn't turn out to be the greatest of things to do, because then there was just too much hormonal issues within the office. And it was until I finally hired a female manager who actually then brought this to my attention, where she said to me, Christina, we need to start hiring men in order for there to be a bit more of a balance within the organization. This may all sound ridiculous, but this was an issue that I actually suffered through my 20s, where I couldn't, I even had difficulties working with men, whether they were third-party agents, suppliers, or even clients, because we're talking about 20 odd years ago. So obviously things have definitely improved in terms of a male-female balance, but it really caused a bit of a rupture within my own organization when I just hired women. I needed to bring in that balance, and once I did bring in that balance, the whole office culture completely changed, from the fact that actually people started to do more team activities with each other, in terms of sports activities after or before work, going more out for lunches in groups. It just changed the dynamic, and it's something that I learned my lesson on, in terms of building up that culture.
And I think with that, if I may add, because we've spoken about this a couple of times about lunch or dinner. All of you who are listening in now, who've been in China for the last 20 years, you know that. But those who haven't been there, or maybe who have just been there 2 or 3 times, food is tremendously important. Most of the issues can be solved at lunch or dinner. Sometimes when you can't get further in negotiations, you call for a lunch or a dinner. And so if you kind of deny your team this get together, that is just not a good idea. Or put differently, it's so easy to actually create this feeling of we, just as Christina said before, just by every now and then having a lunch together.
Yep.
It's easy. It's in terms of the cost that you need to invest, and these are the kind of small things that are crucial, and also in terms of retaining people, super important, important.
So let's just move on to a salary perspective, and I just want to highlight what I said earlier, which is do your research. Look at salary guidelines that you can find through Google search or Baidu searches, but also talk to people about what are the salary guidelines depending on where the person is going to be hired, where they're going to be based, etc. Manfred, do you want to add anything from a salary perspective?
There's a lot of variables really to this. As you said, location is a huge one. Shanghai is just at a very, very different price level than if we're talking Harbin or maybe Shenyang. Then obviously is also experience level. So I think really this is, you need to look at this in detail. And there, I think you will do good if you do a lot of research, or if you maybe try to bring in external expertise, to not go too high or too low. But just one thing, at the times where we think that Chinese employees don't cost a lot, they're definitely over. Capable salespeople are costing a fortune, but they're also worth it.
So now we're on the final point, which is really how to choose that final candidate. And I just want to mention 2 things here, and then I'll let Manfred talk more about his actual experiences in helping clients to make that final choice. So one of the items in terms of the profile of finding someone suitable was competence. And I really feel that in order to find someone who is competent, you've got to create a type of project in the interview process to see whether they're competent. So one of the things that I've been doing quite often lately, and also recommending people to do, is to ask candidates, the top 3, top 5, to create an action plan. What would they do in, I don't know, the first 6 months that they would join your company? You can then see their thought process. You might even be able to see the type of network that they have. You'll be able to see also the type of skill set. Can they present? Can they create something that is legible and easy to follow? You'll also be able to see interest level of the candidate. I found this, from my perspective, very useful to do. The second thing that I wanted to highlight about how to choose a candidate, besides the action plan aspect, is make sure you have a backup. So out of the 5 or 6 that you narrowed down, you might say there's one, and you might want to give that one the offer, and you've then told everyone else, guys, we don't need you anymore. But what happens if that one says no?
Or if that one out of a sudden asks for 30% more because he understands the new situation.
Exactly. So definitely, backup plans are key in this whole process. But Manfred, why don't you pinpoint also a bit in your experience? Like, I mean, if you can give maybe a couple of case studies of how clients have been able to choose those final candidates.
Mm-hmm. I can definitely underline what Christina just said. One of my earlier cases, we used to have that topic with exactly that decision-making problem where it was decided and then all the other candidates were told that they're not needed anymore. And then that final candidate kind of noticed that there was only one left in the process. And that changed his behavior completely. He got really quite demanding in terms of salary. So don't do that. Don't do that really. I think what helps a lot, in kind of sniffing out that right kind of person is, I think the organization is called IDEO. They're very good in bringing innovations into organizations, and they call it lunch them, which really means is, try to introduce them to a lot, or maybe even as many people as you can at your organization, because that will mean that, they might be able to fool one person or 2 people, but are they really able to fool 6 people? Normally, no. Yeah. So just, introduce them to different people, let different people look at them. So what we quite often do, if we're talking about family-owned companies, what we do a lot is to essentially fly them in, bring them to Europe, show them the company, introduce them to the family, things like this. And with this one, you naturally have an opportunity to introduce them to a lot of people, because obviously, for example, if you're recruiting the general manager for China, then a lot of people or a lot of functional areas will need to be communicating with that person. And so that opportunity is automatically there. Something that I've found is hard actually for the candidates to deal with, but probably quite enlightening for the employer, if it is family owned, to kind of bring in, so to speak, the grandparents or the founders of the company. So kind of, I had this one case where we were interviewing plant managers who were kind of like 40, 45, 50 years old. And then the owner of that company, he all of a sudden brought in his mother into the interviewing process. And these really kind of rather experienced and strong men, they kind of they got very shaky on their feet, because this woman, she was just kind of, painting little red dots around the bits and pieces that she didn't like. So it's really, introduce a lot of people, fly them in, bring them here. I think we already said, trust your gut feeling. But again and again, just, ask yourself the question, is this person going to be able to accomplish the task? And here maybe one thing is what I especially see with kind of family-owned companies. Yes, it's their ownership. Yes, it's their company. And yet I don't think in many cases you want to have somebody in China who's just listening to what you say and then do as he's being told. I think it does pay and it does make sense to have somebody who's smart, who's critical, who respects you, obviously, but who is also challenging you, because you will need that feedback. It helps to have somebody telling you the truth and not just telling you the things you like to hear.
Especially in a market like China, which is dynamic, and yeah, I mean, you need someone to tell you what's happening.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so Manfred, maybe we can just finish off a little bit with a guidance to people. You know, they might have expectations that with 1.3 billion people in China, it's going to be very easy and fast to recruit. But maybe you can give a bit of a what's the truth behind the whole timeline that people should expect.
So I think here I need to kind of prepare the groundwork a little bit. If we're talking about recruitment, at least from my perspective, there's a huge difference if we say we need to find the right general manager, or we need to find the next general manager, or we have a plant with 300 people and we need to find a leadership position for that, or so to speak, if we just need to find another seller because we have left one. If we just need to find another seller, then normally we're talking anything, let's say, 6 weeks to 3 months until everything's done and until that person is on board. If we are talking kind of about executive positions, normally what's happening, there's a lot of people involved in your own organization. Your own organization takes a while to understand what they really need. Then they maybe change their mind. And so you need to allow for that. So the time ranges that I see are somewhere between, let's say, 4 or 5 months if you're fast, and if there's already quite a, or maybe 3 months if you're fast, and if there's already quite a decision on whom you need and when that person needs to be there, up to a year. A year means, yes, there's general agreement that you need somebody, but there's no agreement on who that person needs to be. There's a lot of stakeholders in it who have to say. So you really need to know your own organization if you start something like this. Because if there's agreement, we can move fast. If there's not agreement, that essentially means you get people, you meet them, are they good? But then you ask for more people and you see them and you say, well, they're good too. And then, as Christina's pointed out, you know, there's always this changing of requirements throughout the recruitment process. And if there's no real pain point, for example, you want to replace somebody who's retiring so that that position is still filled, and you're not in a hurry, but you just want to find kind of the right person, then they can go on for a very long time. But if we look at this, you know, essentially you get high quality profiles quite soon after you start. So we're talking about 3 to 5 weeks maximum for an executive search case. And then round one interviews, depending if we do a lot of video interviews, because that means that you have feedback quickly and you see that are we on the right lines or not. That can be scheduled very quickly. If you wait until somebody flies in and you only have, let's say, one fly in all the 3 months, that makes it longer. And then again, as I said, if it's executive search, you'd normally want to have probably a second round, then you do a fly in, and then you always need to be careful a little bit with the notice period. So how long time do people actually need to notice their previous employer up front that they can quit? That is normally 1 month in China with Chinese employees and can be up to 6 months with Europeans in certain leadership positions. So that is a critical item in terms of defining your overall timeline. Did that help a little bit, Christina?
Yes, I think that's perfect. I think we're already running out a little bit, but I just want to have, I think Manfred and I should kind of conclude a little bit the whole topic about finding, you know, the right people in China. Let me start off, Manfred, and just say this. You know, I've been, end of August, I would have been 16 years in terms of doing business in China and building up a team in China. And trust me, in the 16 years, I've been burned numerous times by employees. And it either was the fact that they went to competitors, which now I have a different mind frame. I think it's very complimentary if a competitor of mine headhunts and recruits one of my team. It must mean I'm doing a good job in some shape or form.
You're the teacher.
But you know what I have learned is the following: you've got to be fair with your employees in China. I think times have certainly changed, where employees are not necessarily changing jobs just for a 500 RMB increase. Those days are kind of over now, particularly in the bigger cities. People want to be stable, and certainly if they're a certain age, they definitely want to be stable and be within one organization. But everyone wants a challenge. Everyone wants to be treated with respect. Everyone wants to see that there's a hierarchy within the organization that they can then grow. People want to be given responsibilities. They want certainly sometimes responsibilities to increase over time. Trust me, I've also had my fair share of employees who've been quite lazy, who don't want that, because they've got very different ambitions. But you have to know your employees to know what ambitions they have and in which directions they want to go in with the company. I've always tried to maintain the fact that I keep salaries either in the upper end of the average or above the average, primarily because I know that this will retain them, because a lot of competitors can't necessarily afford this higher end amount. And I do that a lot with senior managerial roles so that I have less turnover. But you know, the cultural aspect is something that also took me a long time to get used to, and has helped a lot. So that's just been kind of my experience in terms of retaining employees, making them happy, and having a good time with them. You know, I do go karaoke once in a while. I hate it, but they love it when I go. And you know, it's something that I just do. It's a bit like the food aspect, although I love Chinese food.
Which song is it you take on then, Christina, when you go karaokeing with them?
I'm an 80s girl, so I stick with Madonna and Michael Jackson. It's what I know.
I always love to go for 对面的女孩看过来.
But you know, this is the experience I've had, and like I said, it took a long time, but after about 6, 7, 8 years, I was able to get my turnover rate down to under 5%. So it was a big achievement when we were able to actually achieve that. So Manfred, do you have any 2 cents you can add in terms of summing up?
I'll try adding that a little bit. I think one thing that is probably a universal leadership dogma, or it pays to do so, is, you know, to really care about the people. And people can feel it if you're honest about it or if you're not. And I think especially in China, where maybe in many aspects communication is not as direct as it would be here, it helps to kind of, you know, have this attitude and care about your team, and that is going to be shown with little things. That is going to be shown with, you want water, you buy 5 bottles because your team is with you and you give everybody 1 bottle. You see that one of your employees is having a cough, you make sure that he gets some medicine, or, you know, it's those little things that I found Chinese people respond to in a very, very positive and strong way, and that will help you kind of shape your team, shape your culture, and keep retainment of your team high. The second thing really is, I completely agree with Christina that you need to know your ambition, need to know the ambition of your team members or of your team, but also, you know, always give them perspective. Tell them in a very clear way where they can move to. You know, large corporations are very good at this and talking about kind of development plans and how you're going to advance in the organization. Even if you're a small one, do it. People want to move ahead in China. You need to think a little bit about that. You can't leave people who are ambitious, trying to leave them in the same roles for 5 years. They'll simply quit. And the third thing, you know, even if you have non-performing team members, or if you want to add new roles to your team and so on and so forth, recruitment by all means, not discussing on whether you do it yourself or externally. It should be an ongoing process. So what I've just seen is, start looking early enough. It doesn't matter if you get external support, if you do it yourself. Start looking early enough. Whenever you're in a rush, whenever you're in a hurry, it puts you in a weak negotiation position, and the chances that you actually pay more than what is required for this role, quite high. And I think from my side, that'd be some of my 2 cents. And
Okay.
yeah.
Great. Well, I apologize that we've run out of time. As mentioned, whenever you talk to people that have experiences locally in the Chinese market, we all love to share our experiences. We love to talk about, especially the things that have gone wrong. The war stories or the best stories. So again, this type of discussion format was the first time that Manfred and I have done it. We're just a little bit over time, but we'll improve it next time. I hope everyone enjoyed it. If you do have any questions or comments, add them into the questions section of the control panel, or please email me. I'd love to know your opinion, whether you liked this type of format. Last but not least, thank you, Manfred, for taking the time today to share your opinions, your experiences.
My pleasure, Christina.
Last but not least, just again, going back to a bit of admin, if any of you need some advisory, you have Manfred's contact details, but you also have mine. Feel free to reach out to us if you have questions about services or just generally want an opinion. We publish on a weekly basis an e-newsletter with all the upcoming webinars we're doing, past recordings, publications, and whatnot. And if you're interested in joining, it's free of charge. It can be done so on our website. Follow us on our social media sites as well. And just a last tidbit, we've got August off, but September 2nd, we're coming back with a webinar series on what you need to know about accounting and tax. Not the most glamorous of topics, but it's something that people certainly need to know about. And then for those that are new to the market, we'll be doing in October a little something about market entry into China. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed the webinar series this week. And Manfred, again, thank you very much for participating as well.
Thank you so much, Christina, for having me, and thank you so much for everybody who listened in today. Hope to see you soon on some of our next upcoming webinars.
Take care and goodbye.